It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors. And I've no intention that I've started to stop now. I'm determined to put an end to this. Terrible.
The banquet had been designed to display unity, dignity, and royal control. But before the final course was served, one whispered sentence about Camilla passed between two senior figures and changed the mood of the entire room. Charles stopped speaking. William slowly lowered his glass. Camilla remained seated beneath the chandeliers, unaware that palace aides had heard every word and that the secret conversation would soon escape the walls of the crown's most private gathering. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had called the invitation-only dinner inside Windsor Castle to project strength before a demanding season of royal engagements. A crown advisor is a trusted official who helps the monarch handle sensitive family and constitutional decisions. No journalists, cameras, or outside guests were permitted. Camilla sat beside the king, while William and Catherine faced them across the table. Anne, Edward, Sophie, and senior household officials completed a seating plan designed to suggest harmony. Instead, every pause carried suspicion. A senior advisor leaned toward Princess Anne between courses and whispered, "The Queen's position cannot survive another intervention in William's household." A nearby palace aide heard the sentence clearly and later disclosed it through a documented internal account. Anne did not react with shock. She answered in the same controlled tone. "Then the boundary must be made permanent." Camilla continued speaking warmly to Sophie, unaware that her place within the family had just been questioned only feet away. The Queen Consort smiled, listened, and carried on with the confidence expected of her role. That calm became painful because everyone else at the table could feel something shifting around her. Charles caught the final words. The king stopped midway through a sentence, tightened his hand around the stem of his glass, and looked toward Anne without demanding an explanation. His silence mattered. It suggested that the warning was not new, and that the monarch understood exactly which private dispute had returned to threaten the evening. William recognized the meaning immediately. The prince placed his glass down with unusual care and exchanged one brief look with Catherine. She understood that another intervention referred to Camilla's earlier attempt to influence decisions inside their household. Neither spoke, but their restraint revealed how deeply the conflict had already cut. Camilla finally noticed the distance in Charles's expression and asked whether something was wrong. Before the king could answer, William pushed back his chair and requested a private conversation. The whisper had lasted only seconds, but William's decision to rise from the table revealed that its meaning had been building for far longer. Behind the titles, jewels, and ceremonial smiles were four people carrying four very different fears. Camilla feared humiliation. Charles feared losing control of his family. William feared that silence would be mistaken for permission. Catherine feared that one more private intervention would cross a boundary that could never be repaired. The banquet leak mattered because it did not expose a simple disagreement, it exposed the emotional fracture beneath the monarchy's carefully arranged display of unity. Camilla had spent years fighting for acceptance inside an institution that once viewed her presence as a threat. The Queen's position gave her ceremonial authority and a place beside the sovereign, but it could not protect her from private doubt. Hearing that her role might not survive another conflict would threaten more than status. It would suggest that the legitimacy and respect she believed she had earned could still be taken away by one family dispute. William carried a different responsibility. He and Catherine operated the Wales household, a separate team managing their staff, engagements, charitable work, and preparations for the future reign. Any attempt to influence those choices could be seen as interference with the next monarchy. The prince understood that remaining silent might allow temporary advice to become permanent control. Charles looked first toward his wife, and then toward his son. The king loved Camilla, yet he also knew William's constitutional importance could not be ignored. Constitutional importance meant the prince's direct place in the line of succession and his responsibility for the monarchy's future. Protecting one relationship now risked deepening the wound in the other. Catherine sensed the danger before William moved. She kept one hand beside her untouched plate and quietly told him, "Not here." The princess did not minimize his anger. She feared what would happen if it erupted before the family, turning a private boundary into a public act of defiance. Anne remained composed. She did not ask which intervention the advisor meant, suggesting that she already knew the history behind the warning. The princess watched William carefully, as though waiting for a decision she had expected before the banquet began. Sophie noticed Camilla's expression changing as warmth disappeared from the conversation. She tried to keep speaking, but the queen consort leaned closer and asked, "Why is everyone suddenly watching me?" Sophie hesitated. Her failure to answer gave Camilla the truth before anyone explained it. Charles finally touched his wife's wrist beneath the table and whispered, "We will speak afterwards." The reassurance failed. It confirmed that something serious was being withheld. William remained seated, but quietly asked an equerry to open the small drawing room after dinner. An equerry is a trusted royal aide who handles personal and official arrangements. Anne heard the request and said she would join him. But the dispute was not born beneath the banquet chandeliers. It began weeks earlier, during a ceremony, when one unexpected instruction crossed a line William had already warned must never be crossed. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears small until the consequences become impossible to contain. For this family, that moment came during a private rehearsal at St. George's Chapel. There were no raised voices, no public walkout, and no dramatic declaration. There was only a handwritten change to Catherine's role, an instruction delivered in Camilla's name, and William's discovery that a decision affecting his wife had been made without either of them being consulted. Tension had been growing for weeks. Minor disputes over precedence, joint appearances, household messages, and the division of duties between the King's office and the Wales household had been settled in public but never healed in private. Precedence is the formal order deciding where royals stand, sit, or speak during official events. That mattered because even a small change could signal who held influence and whose authority had been reduced. Camilla had also begun offering more advice about guest lists, ceremonial plans, and which relatives should represent the crown. Some officials viewed her involvement as practical support for Charles. William's advisors saw something more troubling. Suggestions were beginning to arrive as instructions, often before the prince or Catherine had been asked. The decisive moment came during a closed rehearsal at St. George's Chapel. Catherine received a revised order of ceremony, removing her from the opening welcome at an upcoming remembrance service. An order of ceremony is the official plan showing who speaks, where each person stands, and how the service unfolds. Across the top, a courtier had written, "Adjustment approved at the Queen's request." Catherine read the change twice, folded the paper, and asked whether William had approved it. When told he had not been consulted, the princess looked visibly hurt but refused to create a scene inside the chapel. Her concern was not the lost speaking role, it was the message behind it, that decisions about her duties could now bypass her own household. William arrived moments later and demanded to know who had authorized the change. The prince made clear that he was not fighting over prestige or minutes at a lectern. He was defending the principle that Catherine could not be informed of decisions about her own role after they had already been made. Camilla later told Charles through a private conversation that she had only wanted to protect Catherine from an exhausting schedule. Yet the written instruction mentioned nothing about well-being. That omission planted doubt around her explanation. Anne encountered Catherine alone in a side corridor after the rehearsal. The princess quietly told her, "It is not the change that troubles me. It is being told that our consent no longer matters." Anne later repeated those words to a senior advisor, producing the warning whispered at the banquet. The chapel had created the wound, but the closed drawing room confrontation would determine whether the family could still contain it. When the banquet doors finally closed, the performance of unity ended with them. Camilla entered the small drawing room before Charles could stop her. William was already standing beside the fireplace, Catherine near the window, and Anne positioned between both sides, like someone expecting a collision. There were no aides inside, no prepared statements, and no ceremonial escape. Camilla looked directly at the future king and asked the question everyone else had avoided. "Are you trying to remove me?" Charles entered moments later, while Edward and Sophie remained outside to prevent the confrontation from becoming a spectacle involving the entire family. The drawing room offered no formal protection. William, Catherine, Anne, the king, and the queen faced one another without secretaries or courtiers ready to soften their words. That mattered because every sentence would belong entirely to the person who spoke it. William answered first. The prince said he was not challenging Camilla's marriage, title, or place beside Charles. He was challenging her involvement in the Wales household, the separate office managing his and Catherine's duties, staff, charities, and preparations for the future reign. Advice became interference, he warned, when decisions arrived already approved, and his wife learned of them from a courtier. Camilla's voice hardened. She said she had spent years watching ordinary actions treated as proof of hidden ambition. The queen accused William of seeing manipulation in every suggestion because he had never fully separated her from the pain surrounding Diana. Charles flinched at the name, but the future king refused to follow the argument backward. William looked toward Catherine and said, "This is about Catherine being overruled in her own role." The princess lowered her eyes briefly. His defense moved her, yet she disliked becoming the weapon through which husband and stepmother wounded each other. Camilla stepped closer and addressed Catherine directly. She asked whether the chapel change had truly been intended as humiliation. The princess answered quietly, "I believe you made a decision for me when you should have spoken to me." The room fell silent. Catherine's words were controlled, but they left no space for denial. Anne then removed a folded note from her handbag and placed it on the table. The proposal created a formal division of authority. Camilla could advise the sovereign, but she could not issue instructions to the Wales household without written agreement. Written agreement meant that both royal offices would have to approve a decision before staff could act, preventing informal requests from becoming commands. Camilla looked toward Charles and realized he had already read it. His silence became a second betrayal. She demanded that he either destroy the proposal or adopt it. Charles did neither. The king asked everyone to leave except Anne. Camilla believed the final decision belonged to her husband, but the power behind that decision had already shifted into hands she could not easily challenge. Royal authority is rarely exercised through a single dramatic command. It moves through private advice, constitutional caution, family trust, and the quiet agreement of people who understand what public conflict could destroy. As Camilla waited outside the drawing room, three forces were aligning against further intervention: Anne's institutional discipline, William's position as heir, and Charles's fear that another family rupture would damage the crown more deeply than any private concession ever could. Charles still held the final authority as sovereign, but he could not impose a lasting settlement on William's household without the heir's cooperation. The Prince of Wales's private secretary was the senior official responsible for managing his duties, staff, and sensitive communication. Anne carried a different kind of power. Her long service, direct manner, and trust with both father and son allowed her to say what advisors often softened. The boundary proposal did not remove Camilla's public duties or weaken her ceremonial place beside the king. It created one clear rule: any request affecting William, Catherine, or their children would pass through the prince's office and require explicit approval before staff acted. That mattered, because informal suggestions had repeatedly arrived as completed instructions, leaving the Wales household to accept decisions it had never helped make. Charles felt trapped. Alone with Anne, the king said the document made his wife appear dangerous. The princess answered that rejecting it would make his son believe his household could be overruled whenever personal relationships became inconvenient. Neither choice felt kind, but only one could prevent the same conflict from returning. Charles walked toward a side table, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes before sitting down. "I wanted one peaceful evening," he admitted. Anne did not soften her reply. "Peace without boundaries is only postponement." Her words struck because they explained the entire banquet. Silence had preserved appearances, but it had allowed resentment to deepen. Anne then revealed through a documented staff review that the advisor who whispered at dinner had examined several complaints from the Wales office. The chapel incident was not isolated. At least 3 instructions had been sent in Camilla's name without William's approval. Charles finally admitted that he had already cancelled one earlier request involving Prince George's ceremonial schedule. The monarch had hidden that decision from Camilla to avoid an argument, proving he recognized the pattern long before the banquet. Charles picked up the proposal, uncapped a pen, and added one sentence. No member of the sovereign's household may direct the household of the heir. He did not sign it, but Anne understood the decision was nearly made. Outside, Camilla saw the advisor leaving through a side corridor. She ordered her private secretary to identify every complaint filed against her. By morning, the banquet leak would no longer be merely a family wound, because Camilla's attempt to trace the complaints would trigger the first visible consequences. The morning after the banquet, Windsor appeared unchanged. The flags still moved above the towers, staff crossed the courtyards on schedule, and official engagements continued as though nothing had happened. Behind closed doors, however, access was being restricted, instructions were being withdrawn, and Camilla's advisors were discovering that the informal channels they had relied upon were suddenly closed. The Queen had not lost her title, but for the first time, she could feel authority moving away from her. The King's private secretary circulated a confidential instruction before breakfast. The office belonged to Charles's most senior advisor, responsible for managing sensitive royal business and ensuring that formal decisions could be traced. From that morning forward, no change involving the Wales household could be requested through verbal messages, private calls, or handwritten notes. Every instruction required a written record and direct approval. 3 arrangements were immediately suspended. Camilla's office had proposed changing the Commonwealth reception lineup, announcing a joint charity role involving Catherine, and adjusting Prince George's place at a military commemoration. Each decision mattered because it touched the public identity of the next reign. What had once been treated as harmless coordination was now recognized as authority crossing from one household into another. Camilla received the notice while eating breakfast. Her private secretary placed it beside her, and she read the opening paragraph without speaking. The Queen stopped stirring her tea and asked whether Charles had approved it. When told that the order came directly from the King's office, she dismissed everyone from the room. Charles entered minutes later and found his wife alone. Camilla accused him of allowing advisors to present her as a danger to the family. The monarch tried to explain that the rule protected every household, not merely William's. She looked at him and answered, "Then why does everyone know it was written because of me?" Charles could not offer comfort without denying the truth. The crisis spread through staff corridors. Copies of an aide's documented account of the banquet whisper began passing between senior offices. It described Charles falling silent, William lowering his glass, and Anne calling for a permanent boundary. The secrecy surrounding the dinner was collapsing one page at a time. One member of Camilla's team then resigned. Through a private letter, the advisor admitted that the office had relied too heavily on verbal authority. The departure suggested fear someone believed those informal instructions could no longer be defended. William received confirmation at Kensington Palace that the cancelled arrangements would not return. The prince folded the message instead of celebrating. "This should never have required a crisis," he told Catherine. She agreed, but understood paperwork could prevent another intervention without healing the people caught inside it. Catherine then asked William to arrange one final meeting with Camilla alone. The machinery of the palace had delivered its answer, yet Catherine understood that paperwork could stop interference without healing the people trapped inside the conflict. The turning point did not come through the king, the heir, or another carefully drafted palace instruction. It came when Catherine entered a private sitting room and asked every aide to remain outside. Camilla was already waiting, guarded and exhausted, expecting another accusation. Instead, the Princess of Wales sat opposite her and spoke without ceremony. For the first time since the chapel incident, the two women were not symbols of competing royal futures. They were simply two people confronting the damage between them. Catherine had requested the meeting because she believed the new boundary was necessary, but she refused to let it become a permanent act of humiliation. The boundary document was a formal rule defining where one royal household's authority ended and another began. It mattered, because without that line, private advice could again become an instruction before either William or she had agreed. Yet the princess wanted Camilla to understand that this was about consent, not revenge. Camilla listened without Charles, William, Anne, private secretaries, or legal advisors beside her. The queen had no institutional shield, and no one to reshape her words. After a long pause, she admitted that fear had driven her involvement. As William and Catherine became more prominent, she had begun to feel that her own value depended on remaining useful. Camilla feared the institution would tolerate her only while Charles remained strong enough to protect her place. Catherine did not dismiss that fear, but she named the harm it had caused. Every instruction sent in Camilla's name had made her feel less like a future queen and more like a temporary figure whose choices could be altered without warning. She looked directly at her and said, "You protected your place by making mine feel uncertain." Camilla reached into her handbag and removed the revised order of ceremony from the chapel rehearsal. She had kept the same page Catherine folded after discovering the change. The queen studied it, tore it once down the center, and placed both halves on the table. The gesture did not erase what happened, but it ended her attempt to defend it. Camilla then asked whether William wanted her excluded from future planning entirely. Catherine answered that the prince wanted trust restored, but informal authority would not return. Camilla finally apologized without blaming staff or claiming confusion. "I crossed into your household because I was frightened of losing my own." Catherine accepted that the apology was sincere and promised to tell William. She also made one point clear: the boundary document would still be signed and announced internally before the leak reached the public. The private apology repaired something human, but outside the palace walls the leaked whisper was already becoming a national verdict on Camilla's place beside the crown. By sunrise, the words spoken beneath the banquet chandeliers no longer belonged to the royal family. They appeared on television screens, newspaper stands, and phones across the country. The public did not hear the careful private distinctions between marriage, ceremony, household authority, and constitutional boundaries. They heard one devastating sentence: Camilla's position could not survive another intervention. In hours, a private warning became a referendum on trust, memory, loyalty, and the future direction of the monarchy. A detailed palace account exposed the whisper, Anne's demand for a permanent boundary, and the reactions that followed around the table. Buckingham Palace declined to dispute the central conversation. That refusal mattered because it made the disclosure appear too accurate to dismiss. The sovereign's household meant the staff serving Charles directly, while the heir's household managed William, Catherine, and their children. The leaked dispute suggested those two offices had stopped respecting the limits between them. Camilla's supporters argued that she had been punished for trying to help an overburdened family. Her critics saw proof that informal influence had grown into something stronger than advice. Both sides claimed to defend the monarchy, yet each interpreted the same silence differently. A major morning newspaper captured the crisis with a full-width image of Camilla seated alone during an earlier state event. Above it appeared the headline, "The Whisper That Closed the Palace Door." Beneath the photograph, a smaller line declared, "Queen's Influence Restricted After Private Banquet Warning." The front page turned an internal policy change into a public humiliation. By midday, a divided crowd gathered near the gates of Windsor Castle. Some held photographs of Diana. Others carried handwritten signs urging people not to punish Charles's wife forever. The contrast exposed a wound the family had never fully escaped. Camilla remained a living royal figure, but Diana's memory still shaped the public meaning of every conflict around her. Charles watched the coverage from his study and felt the past swallowing the present again. The king muted the television when an old image of Diana appeared beside Camilla's portrait. He had wanted a practical boundary between two households. The public had turned it into another judgment on his marriage. Camilla refused advice to cancel her afternoon engagement. She adjusted her coat and told her private secretary, "I will not answer the story by disappearing." Her appearance did not end the debate, but it denied the leak the power to drive her into hiding. The palace then confirmed that the sovereign's and heirs' households would operate through separate chains of authority. Camilla was not named, yet everyone understood why the rule existed. That evening, Charles summoned William and Camilla for one final conversation. The public had already delivered its loud judgment, but the monarchy's true verdict would be written quietly by the three people most wounded by the whisper. The final meeting contained none of the spectacle that had surrounded the leaked banquet whisper. There were no chandeliers, formal uniforms, or rows of anxious courtiers. Charles, Camilla, and William sat around a small table with a 2-page agreement between them. The king understood that his wife needed dignity. The heir understood that his household needed protection. Camilla understood that preserving her place could no longer mean entering spaces where her authority had never been granted. The monarchy now had to choose clarity over resentment. Charles read the first page slowly. The agreement confirmed that Camilla would keep her full ceremonial position beside him, continue her charitable work, and advise the monarch privately. A ceremonial position meant her public duties, appearances, and role at state occasions would remain secure. Yet the document also drew a permanent line. She would hold no independent authority over William and Catherine's household, staff, schedule, or children. William accepted a difficult compromise. The prince agreed that the settlement would remain an internal governance measure rather than a public rebuke. Internal governance meant a private rule controlling how royal offices worked together, without turning the decision into a public punishment. He would not demand further resignations or use the leak to weaken Camilla's standing. His aim was protection, not humiliation. Charles then admitted his own failure. The king had avoided confrontation by quietly canceling disputed instructions instead of addressing the pattern. That choice allowed Camilla to believe her involvement was supported, while William felt repeatedly ignored. Silence had not preserved peace. It had only delayed the moment when every hidden grievance returned at once. Camilla accepted responsibility without asking for the boundary to disappear. The queen acknowledged that fear had caused her to confuse closeness to the sovereign with authority over the wider family. She asked only that her private apology to Catherine be understood as genuine. William listened and did not challenge her sincerity. Charles signed first. He passed the pen to his son, who added his name without hesitation. Camilla studied both signatures before signing beneath the sentence, confirming that no future instruction would reach the heir's household without consent. William did not leave immediately. He looked at her and said, "This protects the future. It does not remove you from the family." The words separated two ideas the leak had cruelly joined. Losing unchecked influence was not the same as losing personal belonging. The banquet whisper exposed old wounds, but it also forced clarity. Camilla remained queen. Charles remained her husband and sovereign. William secured the independence required of the future king. What began as a whisper across a banquet table ended as a signed promise. The future of the crown would no longer be governed by fear, silence, or unspoken permission. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.